peace. I have a family. I have people who need me. You have no family. You were never born. Just like you always wanted. And you were right. It's better this way.
Delighted to be joined on the show today by the director of the recent Fright Fest hit, The Harbinger, Andy Mitton. Andy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Just a brief outset. I've kind of spoke to you out with this on Twitter and told you my love for this film. It is fantastic. And also your previous, which I found because of this, The Witch in the Window, so I'll get that out of the way nice and early, but both really great horror movies. So coming up with the idea for The Harbinger, and also if there's any accent issues, just let me know if I speak too quick.
That's great.
So coming up with the idea for The Harbinger, was it something developed during the pandemic, or was that a process that kind of mutated as it went?
It was developed during the pandemic. It came out really inspired the summer of 2020. There was another film we were hoping to shoot that summer that wasn't going to be possible. So I started, we were not in New York, but we were close to New York. We were in New England. It was a bad place to be at that time in the early days. So that we were swimming in the existential dread of that summer. And this just became a way to sort of process, I think, those feelings. I talked with my producing partner, Richard King, about, like, is it a good idea or a bad idea to sort of take this on? And we figured there's a debate, obviously. I think there's still a debate, but that horror is a great place to look at something, to process what's going on in the present. It gives you a little bit of a lens, a little bit of a cushion between you and the hard truth. And so, we're like, we'll give it a try. And this thing flew out of me. And really quick, I had a draft in like August of 2020, and we were shooting in February. So just a few months later.
Yeah, just what you were touching on there, obviously with it being a pandemic horror, and you had to have a sort of quite a difficult discussion about whether to move forward with it. Did you have any worries about a potential, not necessarily a backlash, because I think we're seeing now more of a pandemic-based horror starting to make a bit of a breakthrough. People, we're not moving away from the pandemic, but it certainly calmed down, and certainly in the media and things like that. Was it really difficult to push through with that one? Were you worried about any sort of negative backlash at all?
Yeah, I was. I thought, for me, the distinction was, if I just go and try and write about it on the nose, then I would even backlash against myself in that instance. Like, that was never the goal. The goal was, like, I had a story idea, and the idea could exist in another time, in another context. But like any theme in any setting you look for as a storyteller, this fueled the story. So I just kept thinking of it that way. It's the fuel running into the story. If it ever just becomes the heart of the story, I'm wagging the dog at that point. I have a problem at that point. So we just I tried to keep that balance. I had everyone around me trying to keep that balance. And I do what I always do. I check in with, like, the 12-year-old version of myself who fell in love with movies, and the reason we do it, and make sure that guy's happy too. And, took a swing.
Yeah, and it's paid off massively. So with the kind of the context of the movie, with The Harbinger being this demon that essentially erases you from existence, it erases your being, the memories that people have of you. An interesting thing that I certainly found from it is it kind of touching on the way that during the pandemic, and with the amount of loss that people were suffering, And with us viewing it through the kind of prism of the media, a death was almost kind of like a number.
Yes.
Instead of being a face. Was that the kind of the impact you took from it?
That's exactly it. It was like there wasn't time to honor the deaths or the life, really, is you know, or you know, worse, there wasn't an opportunity for people to just even go by the bedside in the hospital of the person going through it. So that sort of is what sparked it, because I had some technical ideas about like what you're talking about. I think I've wanted to do a movie for a while where people are pulled out of their very existence. But what really makes you go and write it is that reason that adds depth and emotional value and resonance. So once that sparked off, I was on the road.
Yeah, definitely, and it lands. It was just a thought I had while watching it, if that was your kind of intention, because there was so many people that, as you're saying, couldn't say bye to loved ones, and people affected in different ways during the kind of years when it was hitting really hard. Another aspect of it is the kind of distinguishing between dreams and reality. The character of Monique, who's played by Gabby Beans, who's fantastic in it. In your opinion, and just kind of delving in a wee bit to Monique's kind of journey through this, do you think that she's potentially trapped a lot earlier than what we figure out? I thought that personally watching it, but that's just, like, you know, I mean, like by...
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the very lines we're trying to blur, and it's all about kind of taking the footing out from the audience. So that is the mode of thinking. But I think in order to build in my head what would feel like a architecturally sound story in a machine, I had to, as much as possible, look at Monique, who's the symbol of hope in the story, and infuse not only the character, but my belief in the character as I even wrote the story, that she could bring that hope into a bad situation, that she could be a buoyant present. So for me, her feet were on the ground until they weren't.
Yeah. And it's something that you certainly see from Monique from the offset. She's a very family oriented person. She lives with her brother and her dad, and she also makes the really difficult decision to leave them and go and visit her friend, who seems to be suffering from kind of night terrors and sleepwalking and all sorts of surreal aspects to her daily life. With Monique as the character, was it important that she, because the journey she's going to go through, that she was a positive person to kind of bounce off of, to give that give the audience that sort of character to stick to?
Yeah, I think so, especially in this story, because it was at a time when we all felt kind of doomed. So what I didn't want to feel was we had these two doomed characters at the center of the story, because there's no tension in that, and that's also not what I was trying to follow. So and Gabby just really brought that together. Gabby honestly was that force on our set. I mean, she is a completely steady presence, that she's studied everything. She studied everything every day, and she was she brought hope into the situation, and she had great chemistry with Emily Davis, who's playing Mavis. So once I saw that juxtaposition in action, I was like, this was better than my intention. Of course, my intention was there, but it's what you hope other people come in and make your work better.
Yeah, as you said, she's great. Emily Davis is fantastic as well. They kind of root the film, and you're going through that journey with them, essentially, through the fear of the known and the unknown at times. What's interesting as well, obviously, with the two characters going through the same stage at different stages, the same terror at different stages, is their understanding, and there's not a, what's the word I'm looking for? There's not I've taken a complete blank. There's not a kind of fight back from Monique against Mavis. She's there as support. She's not doubting her. It's really important that they both work together to try and combat essentially what is the undefeatable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I I'm constantly trying to, like, as a horror fan, I try and skip over some moments that have become tropes in my head, which is like the doubting friend is like one of the biggest, I think it's fun to subvert that. I see an audience sort of lean in when you subvert that and go, because I think a lot of horror movies spend a lot of time breaking down their internal relationships. And I like to try and work in the other way, like have faith in your main external conflict so that you can build up the love in the story rather than break it down. And part of that is belief and alignment and going with each other. And so, the actors really wrapped their arms around that too. That was the hope.
Yeah, works perfectly. Just what you're saying there about kind of subverting tropes a wee bit with the Harbinger and also with the Witch in the Window. You seem to have a approach typical kind of genre beats, but in an unorthodox way. So there's plenty of kind of horror movies and TV shows where the monster's in the periphery and you don't really see it, but you've wrapped that around a story in The Harbinger of the pandemic and the relationship between Mavis and Monique, and then also Witch in the Window is wrapped around mostly the kind of father and son almost bonding story. Is that what drives you when you're writing a movie? Just subverting those tropes, yes, using them in an effective way, but not in a way that would be generally expected? Yeah,
I think it's a percentage of it is intention, and another percentage of it is just what happens when I write, or who I, a result of like who I am and what my influences are, and the fact that I'm kind of a weird animal that grew up loving horror. I've always been a complete horror nut and remain one, but I also then got really into theater and got my degree in theater, and had a nonprofit theater company for a while in LA, and so the values of the theater and some of those more human, I don't know, character based, for lack of a better term, like the combination of those things I think create something sort of unique, and I like seeing those tropes through a lens of just more humanity. Or really, what it comes down to is music. For like everything is music, right? So like we know the regular rhythms. The mainstream has provided those rhythms, and they're baked into our horror sensibilities. So that allows us to play different rhythms, to work to bounce off that and to subvert those expectations, and to introduce more of the rhythms maybe we recognize from our real life into the machinations of a horror story, and seeing what kind of friction comes out of that.
Yeah, definitely, and it makes when the truly horrific moments happen, it adds weight to them, I feel. Yeah. It just gets that extra bump out of you, if I want a better word. Was there anything in particular that you watched leading up to when writing this that kind of influenced your writing for it? Was there any particular directors or genres or movies? Yeah.
I think I always bring my favorites, and like my favorite directors and filmmakers, a few of them in horror, but like Sidney Lumet was always at the top of that mountain for me. And of course Kubrick and Coen brothers and some of the greats, always William Friedkin. But for this in particular, Jacob's Ladder, Adrian Lyne's Jacob's Ladder was the touchstone as sort of like my favorite dreamy horror movie that really has its feet in humanity, and feels a little bit more down and dirty. You're always kind of standing on Freddy Krueger's shoulders, working in dreams. So like that's in mind, but tonally I knew we were doing a much different thing. So I would say Jacob's Ladder and the documentary, The Nightmare on sleep paralysis were probably the two things that got in here the most heavily.
Yeah, I've never seen that one actually. I'll definitely check that out.
It's scary.
Is it? That's the real life side of horror that you don't want. Sorry, I'm getting bothered by my dog here, and he's about to jump up. Away you go, Leo. Sorry. Right. So we did touch a wee bit there on the kind of reality warping as well, and what the Harbinger brings to that. And again, you kind of have a section of the reality warping and the Witch in the Window as well. Is that something that interests you as a writer, because you can play about with the laws of physics, and you can change people's perception of the world and put it onto the screen?
Yeah, I think one of the purest desires, even when like of kids who want to be storytellers, is like the desire to change to bend the rules, and to create worlds where the rules bend. It's also an effective way, I think, to be hardwired to a character, to invest in their psychological experience. Like in the Harbinger, there's this sort of long game that's being played in that when we hear about Mavis's nightmares, we hear about them. We watch her. She tells us. We don't go into those nightmares because she's not who we're hardwired to. So I think that pays off when we finally get, when we go into those nightmares with Monique. But it's her perspective that we share. So you kind of like with Witch in the Window, like I like the idea that hauntings can be psychologically manifested, and affect what you see, and that every person, given their vulnerabilities, will see it differently. Yeah,
perfect way to sum it up there. And I'll just a wee wrap up before we go. Just again, thanks very much for joining. As I said, love this and love Witch in the Window. I'll check out what else you've got. You can see The Harbinger is out on VOD and digital download just now. This just came out yesterday in the UK. Yesterday in terms of the day recording. You can also find Witch in the Window on Shudder. Definitely check that out for everyone. Shudder in the UK as well. Andy, thanks very much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. It's nothing but a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate the support and the great questions. And thanks for having me.
Cheers.